He was just driving home in the rain until he saw a woman and 3 children huddled on the sidewalk, soaked and shivering. He could have kept driving like everyone else, but he didn't, and that changed everything. Subscribe to the channel if you believe in the power of kindness. And let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? The rain wasn't just falling, it was crashing down like the sky itself had broken open, pouring its grief upon the earth. Streetlights glowed dimly through the downpour, casting blurry halos on the soaked pavement. Water ran in rivers down the sides of the road, pooling at corners and rushing into storm drains already overflowing. Cars hissed by, tires slicing through puddles, splashing grimy water across the sidewalks. Pedestrians hurried along, heads down, faces hidden beneath umbrellas, seeking refuge in warm buildings, taxis, or anything with a roof. But on the edge of the sidewalk, just near the curb of a narrow side street, someone wasn't moving. She was seated on the wet concrete, her back hunched forward, her thin frame barely shielded from the relentless rain. Her clothes clung to her skin, saturated to the thread. Long braids, soaked and heavy, draped over her face. But that wasn't what caught Jordan West's attention. It was the small forms pressed into her sides. 3 children, drenched, shivering, silent. Jordan had almost missed them entirely. He was behind the wheel of his black Escalade, gliding through the city streets he knew so well. A meeting with his logistics partner had dragged on longer than expected, and now all he wanted was to go home, change out of his tailored suit, and forget the world for a few hours. But when the headlights swept across that corner and revealed the huddled cluster of life, this woman and her 3 children sitting motionless in the storm, something in his chest contracted sharply. He passed them by, just a few feet. Then he hit the brakes. Hard. For a long moment, he sat still, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching the rain pound against the windshield. He didn't want to get involved. He told himself he couldn't fix every problem in this city. There were shelters, services. This wasn't his business. He wasn't equipped for this. But he had seen her eyes. Even in that brief flash of light, he'd seen them, wide, dark, terrified. Not from him, not from the world, just hollow. The kind of hollow that came when someone had nothing left to fear because they had nothing left to lose. He put the car in park, hit the hazards, and stepped out into the storm. Rainwater immediately soaked through his expensive coat. It ran down his collar and into his shirt, but he barely felt it. His focus was on her, this woman cradling 3 children against her as if she could shield them from the cold with her own body. He approached slowly, cautiously, as if approaching a wild creature backed into a corner. "Ma'am," he called out, voice low, calm, "do you need help?" She didn't look up at first. She just tightened her arms around the kids, one in her lap, 2 curled at her sides. A little boy, maybe 3, coughed weakly against her chest. The girl on her right, maybe 5 or 6, turned her head toward Jordan but said nothing. The smallest child, possibly 2, was limp in her arms, face buried against her neck. He knelt beside her, not caring about the puddles soaking through his pants. "It's not safe out here," he said gently. "You're all freezing. I have a place nearby. It's warm. There's food. Just come inside, get dry, that's all." The woman finally raised her face. It was streaked with tears and rain, but her eyes, those same eyes, held every ounce of her suffering. She stared at him as if trying to decide whether he was real, whether this moment was real. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. Instead, she clutched the smallest child tighter. "I'm not here to take anything," Jordan said, more softly. You don't have to trust me. Just let me help. Let me get your kids warm." The boy coughed again, this time longer, deeper. She looked down at him, then back at Jordan. For another second, the world seemed to freeze between them. Then, silently, she nodded. Jordan stood and offered a hand. Her legs buckled as she tried to rise, but she managed, never letting go of her children. He reached out and gently lifted the little girl into his arms. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just looked at him with wide, quiet eyes and nestled into his chest. His throat tightened. They walked through the rain together, Jordan holding one child, the woman balancing the other two as best she could. His office was only a few blocks away, nestled inside one of the high-rises his company had developed. The security guard on night duty stared in confusion as the CEO entered, soaked through and carrying a child. "Blankets," Jordan ordered, "hot tea, towels, and call Dr. Hayes. Tell him it's urgent." The woman sat down gingerly on the leather couch in the lounge area. Her name, he learned later, was Naomi. She kept the children close, her eyes never leaving them. Even with warmth and light returning to her limbs, her body remained tense, as if expecting someone to drag her away at any moment. Dr. Hayes arrived quickly, and after a quiet examination assured them the children were okay. Just cold, wet, hungry, no serious illness. He left behind medication, instructions, and a soft look Jordan hadn't seen on a man's face before. When he left, Jordan returned to the lounge and found Naomi still sitting there, cradling her youngest son. "Where do you live?" he asked gently. Naomi's eyes didn't meet his. "Nowhere," she whispered. Her voice was so quiet it almost didn't reach him. "My husband died in a crash last month. We were renting a room, but I couldn't pay. Got kicked out. The shelters were full. I kept thinking I'd find something, but then the rain started, and I just sat down. I didn't know where else to go." She stopped speaking. She looked down at her kids, her fingers trembling as she smoothed the little boy's soaked curls. Her chest rose and fell with shallow, restrained breaths. She didn't ask for anything, didn't cry, didn't explain further. She just sat there, holding on to the only 3 things she had left. Jordan couldn't speak. Not at first. He had spent his entire life building walls, physical ones, emotional ones. He was the master of control, strategy, power. He had learned early that to survive you couldn't stop, couldn't feel, couldn't let anything drag you down. But now, here was a woman who had lost everything, and still was doing everything she could to protect her children. "You can stay here tonight," he said quietly. "We'll figure something out in the morning." She stared at him like he was a ghost. "Why?" she asked, hoarse. Jordan didn't move. "Because I saw you," he said. "I really saw you, and I couldn't keep driving." She didn't reply. She just nodded, barely. And Jordan turned away, walked out onto the balcony, and lit a cigarette with trembling hands. The rain was still falling, hard, but inside him something had changed, and he knew, even before the night was over, this woman and her children would never again be strangers to him. They were already part of his life. Because one night, in the rain, he didn't drive past. The next morning, the storm had passed, but the city still wore the scent of wet asphalt and trembling leaves. The sun fought its way through low-hanging clouds, casting a soft, hesitant light over the skyline. Jordan West had not slept much. Even in his penthouse apartment, surrounded by all the trappings of wealth and power, his thoughts kept circling back to the woman and her children asleep on the office couch. He got dressed quietly, choosing jeans and a sweater instead of his usual tailored suit. It felt strange, unfamiliar, like stepping into someone else's life. But something told him that the rules he'd always lived by, the cold precision, the emotional distance, the unspoken belief that vulnerability was weakness, didn't apply anymore. Not with them. When he arrived back at the office, the lounge was quiet. Naomi lay on the couch, curled protectively around her children. Her face was peaceful, but her arms were wrapped tightly around the smallest one, even in sleep, as if she feared he'd be taken from her if she let go. Jordan didn't speak. He stepped closer, gently pulled the blanket up over the girl's feet, and placed a soft toy he'd brought, a little line, beside the boy's hand. Then he turned and went to the kitchen to brew coffee. The sound of footsteps made him turn. Naomi stood in the doorway, hair still damp, wrapped in one of the office towels, wearing a borrowed t-shirt that hung loosely on her frame. Her eyes held a flicker of disbelief, like she wasn't entirely convinced she was awake. "Morning," he said calmly. She nodded, murmured something unintelligible, and sat down at the kitchen table. Her hands gripped the mug he placed in front of her as if anchoring herself in reality. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered eventually. "You did something impossible. Just gave us warmth, safety, without asking anything." Jordan shook his head. "It wasn't charity. It was just the right thing to do." Naomi lowered her eyes. "We can leave today. I don't want to be a burden." And there it was again. That quiet defensiveness, the instinct to retreat, to carry the weight alone. He hated that look in her eyes, hated that someone like her, strong, resilient, doing everything to protect her children, felt like she had to apologize for needing help. "Naomi," he said gently, "I have an apartment. No one lives in it. It's furnished, warm, clean. You can stay there. Not forever. Just until things settle. No strings, no catch." Her lips parted, but no words came out. She stared at him like he'd offered her a piece of the moon. "You'd do that for us?" "I already have," he said. "I just need you to say yes." She hesitated. Then she nodded. "Only for a little while," she added. "As soon as I can, I'll move on." Jordan didn't press her. He just smiled. "Let's get your kids into a home." The apartment was on the third floor of a new development. Clean lines, modern layout, built by his own company. It wasn't massive, but it was beautiful. 2 bedrooms, a sunlit living room, a cozy kitchen, and soft carpets that welcomed small, bare feet. Naomi stood frozen in the doorway as he opened the door and motioned her inside. The children peeked past her legs, hesitant, silent. Jordan crouched down to the boy's level. "This place is yours for now," he said. "Nothing scary. You're safe here." Little Elias reached for his mother's hand. Then Zara, the middle child, spotted a row of stuffed animals on the shelf. She gasped and ran toward them, grabbing a teddy bear and clutching it to her chest. Mika followed, toddling unsteadily toward the rug and collapsing onto it with a soft giggle. Naomi pressed her lips together, turned away slightly, and wiped her eyes. Jordan pretended not to notice. Instead, he walked to the kitchen and unpacked the groceries he had brought that morning. Cereal, fruit, soup, juice boxes, and 3 chocolate bars. That night, he left them with clean sheets, full bellies, and an extra set of blankets. He didn't stay long, just enough to make sure they were settled, but something tugged at him as he walked away. A pull, a quiet gravity, and it wasn't long before he came back. At first, his visits were practical. He brought groceries, medicine, a few changes of clothes, but gradually they became more than that. He found himself staying longer each time. One evening, he helped Naomi assemble a bookshelf. Another day, He arrived to find the kids coloring at the coffee table and ended up drawing cartoon animals with them for over an hour. They started to call him Mr. J. Zara would race to the door when he knocked, and Mika learned to say his name. It was strange and disarming. The man who once ran boardrooms with military precision now spent his evenings learning to braid hair, telling bedtime stories, and wiping juice spills off the couch. Naomi watched it all silently at first. She'd sit in the corner, folding laundry or cooking dinner, sneaking glances at him as he helped Elias with his reading or let Mika climb onto his lap. There was something protective in her posture, like she was afraid to let herself hope. One evening, when the kids had gone to bed, Naomi made tea and offered him a cup. They sat together at the tiny kitchen table, a warm silence between them. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked, not accusingly, just searching. Jordan looked at her for a long moment. "Because I needed to," he said quietly. "That night, when I saw you under the rain, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. I've spent my life building buildings, closing deals, making money, but I never built anything that mattered. Until now." She said nothing, but her gaze softened. That night, Jordan left with a strange ache in his chest. He didn't know what it was. He only knew that something deep inside him had shifted. That this little apartment, filled with noise and spilled toys and tiny socks, had begun to feel more like home than any penthouse ever had. The following weeks passed in a blur of moments. Naomi started working part-time at a local diner, washing dishes and helping in the kitchen. Jordan tried to convince her to rest, to wait, but she insisted. She didn't want to live on anyone's mercy. She wanted to earn her steps back. He admired that. She would leave early, kiss each of her kids goodbye, and come home tired but glowing with the satisfaction of doing something on her own. Jordan visited nearly every day. Sometimes he brought dinner, sometimes toys, sometimes nothing at all, just himself. They would talk, laugh, sit in silence. He wasn't sure when it happened exactly, but he realized he looked forward to those evenings more than anything else. Not the calls from investors, not the press. Just the warm light in that small apartment and the quiet joy of being needed, not for his money, not for his name, but simply for being there. One day, he brought 3 small bicycles as a surprise. The children screamed with joy. Elias tried to ride in circles in the living room. Zara decorated hers with stickers. Mika sat on his, feet not even reaching the pedals, and clapped. That evening, Naomi stood beside him on the balcony as the children rode in the parking lot below. "You're getting too close," she said suddenly. Jordan turned. "What do you mean?" "Too close to us, the kids, me. One day, this will end, and it's going to hurt." He didn't answer right away, because she was right. He should have kept a distance, should have drawn a line, but it was already too late. He looked out at the children, their laughter echoing into the dusk. "Maybe," he said softly, "but I'd rather hurt than feel nothing at all." It was a crisp morning in late October when Jordan West found himself standing in the toy aisle of a department store, staring at a shelf full of plastic dinosaurs and dolls with big, glassy eyes. He wasn't sure what he was doing there. Just a week ago, he had been negotiating a multi-million-dollar land acquisition deal over breakfast. Now, he was wondering whether Mika, the youngest, would prefer a stuffed giraffe or a singing raccoon. Nothing in his past life had prepared him for this. Not the Ivy League education, not the board meetings, not the endless rows of spreadsheets, or the brutal all-nighters that had built his company from the ground up. Yet, here he was, debating the merits of plush animals in a department store before 9 a.m. He picked the giraffe. When he arrived at the apartment, the door flew open before he could knock. Zara stood there with wild morning hair and bright, expectant eyes. "You're late," she announced dramatically. "I'm 5 minutes early," Jordan said with a grin, stepping inside. "You're still late," she replied, folding her arms like a little judge. Naomi emerged from the kitchen wearing a faded hoodie and leggings, her curls piled into a loose bun. She had flour on her cheek, and the scent of banana pancakes wafted behind her. "You're feeding them too well," Jordan joked. "They'll start expecting this every day." Naomi shrugged. "Some expectations are good." He watched her for a moment. How she moved, how she laughed when Mika threw a spoon on the floor, how she gently scolded Zara for jumping on the couch. There was grace in everything she did. Real, unpolished grace. And she did it all while carrying a storm of pain he could only imagine. Later, as the kids played on the rug, Jordan sat on the armrest of the couch, sipping coffee. Naomi leaned against the opposite wall. "You really don't have to keep coming every day," she said. "We'll be okay." "I know," he said, "but I want to." She tilted her head slightly. "You're a busy man. Your time must be worth a lot." Jordan's eyes moved from the kids to her. "It is. That's why I'm spending it here." Naomi didn't reply, but her lips curled in the faintest smile, and her eyes looked away before he could see too much. That evening, something changed. Jordan stayed longer than usual. They ate dinner together, all 5 of them squeezed around the tiny kitchen table. The children laughed and made a mess. Naomi looked tired but happy. When bedtime came, she read them a story while Jordan cleaned up the dishes. He didn't know what it was. Maybe it was the way the lamplight fell on her face, or the sound of her voice reading softly in the next room, but something cracked open in him. Later, when the apartment had gone quiet and Naomi returned to the kitchen, he poured her tea and gestured to the chair across from him. She sat, and for a few minutes they just listened to the wind tapping against the windows. "I used to think emotions were weaknesses," he said quietly. Naomi looked up. "I used to think that as long as I controlled everything, money, time, people, nothing could hurt me. But then I saw you sitting in the rain, and now—" He stopped, swallowed hard. Naomi's voice was gentle. "Now? Now I feel everything," he whispered, "and I don't want it to stop." She didn't answer, but she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. It was enough. The following days blurred together in the softest kind of rhythm. Jordan started picking up the kids from school when Naomi worked late. He learned to tie tiny shoelaces and distinguish between princesses and fairies. He stocked their fridge without being asked. He fixed a broken chair. He painted the kids' room pale yellow and let them help. Naomi would shake her head and smile like he was crazy, but her eyes always gave her away. One rainy Friday, Zara fell and scraped her knee on the playground. Jordan rushed her to urgent care, cradling her tiny form in his arms like porcelain. She cried the whole way, but the moment he handed her a chocolate bar afterward, she beamed at him like he'd fixed the world. When they returned home, Naomi hugged Zara tightly, then looked up at Jordan with a tremor in her voice. "I should have been there." "You're doing more than enough," he said. "You're not alone in this anymore." She looked away, but not before he saw the tears she was trying to hide. 1 week later, a crisis hit. Mika woke up burning with fever. He refused to eat, whimpered in his sleep, and couldn't hold down water. Naomi panicked. Jordan arrived within minutes of her call and rushed them to the nearest children's hospital. They spent the night there, Jordan pacing the hallway holding Naomi's hand, wiping her tears when she broke down. He sat beside Mika's tiny hospital bed for hours, humming lullabies he half remembered from his own childhood. The doctors assured them it was a viral infection, nothing life-threatening. But for Jordan, something profound happened during those sleepless hours. He wasn't just concerned. He wasn't just helping. He was terrified. Terrified in the way only a father could be. By dawn, when Mika finally stabilized and the fever broke, Jordan had made a silent vow. There would be no just visiting anymore. These weren't just people he cared about, they were his. Naomi knew it too. When they got home and Mika fell asleep in her arms, she turned to Jordan, her face pale and tired, and wrapped her arms around him for a long, silent moment. She didn't say thank you. She didn't have to. He held her as if she were made of glass and whispered into her hair, "I've got you. I've got all of you." From that day on, nothing was the same. Jordan was no longer a visitor in their lives. He was part of it. He read to Elias at night, played hide-and-seek with Zara, and rocked Mika to sleep on stormy evenings. He started showing up with new books, school supplies, and groceries before Naomi could ask. He took the kids to the zoo, to the aquarium, to the bookstore. Naomi cooked meals, sewed buttons, and sang lullabies. They never discussed the future. But it was unfolding around them anyway. Jordan had never known peace like this. The world outside kept spinning. Deals, deadlines, noise. But when he stepped into that apartment, it all melted away. He still ran his company, still answered calls and signed contracts. But his mind always returned to the tiny blue bike in the hallway, to the crayon drawings on the fridge, to the woman with the tired smile who had taught him what strength really looked like. He realized he hadn't just built a new routine, he had built a life. And now, standing in the kitchen one quiet night as Naomi hummed to herself while washing dishes, he knew it was time. He stepped behind her, gently took the plate from her hands, and turned her to face him. "Naomi," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you're not alone anymore, and I'm not going anywhere. If you let me, I'll be here. Always. Not as a guest. As family." She stared at him, eyes wide, and then, for the first time since they met, she cried, not from fear or pain, but from the overwhelming relief of knowing she didn't have to fight alone anymore. They stood there, in a kitchen filled with warmth, laughter echoing faintly from the children's room, and a future finally beginning to take shape. The seasons shifted slowly. Trees once ablaze with the fire of autumn shed their last golden leaves, and winter crept in quietly, frosting the windows and filling the air with the scent of cinnamon and chimney smoke. The city prepared for the holidays, lights strung across balconies, store windows decorated with snowflakes and ribbons. But inside a modest apartment on the third floor of Jordan West's development, time seemed to flow with its own rhythm. And it was no longer just an apartment. It was a home. The days had settled into a soft, deliberate cadence. Naomi went to work in the mornings, her hands no longer trembling when she left her children behind. She came home with stories of regular customers, new recipes, and quiet pride. Jordan had made sure her job at the cafe came with flexible hours and decent pay, not because he wanted to control her life, but because he knew she would only accept help that didn't feel like charity. She was stubborn like that, and he loved her for it. He too had changed. His mornings no longer began with corporate reports and urgent calls. They started with breakfast cereal spilled on the table, mismatched socks, and Mika clinging to his leg. His phone buzzed less often now, not because his business suffered, but because he'd started saying no to things that didn't matter, to deals that came at the cost of peace, to people who didn't know how to love without strings. Instead, he said yes to Elias's school plays, to Zara's tea parties, to long evenings spent building Lego towers and laughing when Mika knocked them down. Yes to dinner with Naomi, and the quiet moments when they sat side by side, saying nothing because nothing needed to be said. They weren't in a rush to define it, but love had already claimed its place in the cracks. It happened on a sunny Sunday. Jordan showed up at the door with a large wicker basket and a grin that made Zara squeal before she even saw what was inside. "We're going on a picnic," he announced, "to the lake." The kids erupted in cheers. Naomi laughed, trying to wrestle shoes onto squirming legs and zip up jackets while Mika tossed crackers across the floor. They drove out of the city, past rows of quiet trees and winding roads, until they reached a lake surrounded by tall grass and silence. The sun hung low but bright, and the sky was streaked with soft pastels. They laid out blankets, kicked off their shoes, and spent the afternoon being exactly what they were, a family. Zara chased butterflies. Elias tried to fish with a stick. Mika fell asleep on Jordan's chest. Naomi sat under a tree, watching them, her heart full to the brim. She felt a quiet click inside her. A door she didn't realize had been closed, slowly opening again. She no longer felt like a guest in her own story. When the sun began to dip and the air turned crisp, Jordan helped Naomi pack the remains of the picnic while the kids chased their shadows across the grass. She touched his arm lightly and said, "You know, we're not just your friends anymore." He looked at her, eyes calm, warm. "I know," he said. "I feel it every day." Then, without ceremony, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, simple box. Naomi froze. He didn't get down on one knee. He didn't speak with rehearsed lines. He just took her hand, looked her in the eyes, and said, "I don't want to lose you. Not you. Not the kids. Let's make this forever. Let's be a family. Officially." Her breath caught. Tears welled, not from fear, not from sadness, from knowing, for the first time in a long time, that the future was safe. She nodded, and the wind carried her whisper, "Yes." The wedding was small, intimate, just close friends and a handful of Naomi's extended relatives. The children were the stars of the day. Zara carried the rings but dropped them halfway up the aisle. Elias forgot his speech halfway through, and Mika spilled juice on Jordan's shirt before the cake. No one minded. Because it wasn't a perfect day. It was a real one. And it marked the start of something that had been building slowly, quietly, out of rain, kindness, trust, and time. Jordan moved into the apartment for a while, despite owning several grand homes. "This is where the heart is," he said simply. Later, they would buy a house just outside the city with a backyard, a swing set, and room for laughter to echo. But for now, that little third-floor apartment held their entire world. Years passed. Naomi blossomed. She returned to school part-time, earned her certification in social work, and took a job at a women's shelter. Not as a client, but as a voice for others. She spoke gently, listened deeply, and gave the kind of help that never made anyone feel small. Jordan expanded his company's mission. He started a foundation that built housing for displaced families, staffed by people who had once needed that same help. The motto, printed on every flyer, etched onto the entrance of every building, came from the moment that had changed his life. "Because I saw her, and I didn't drive past." People noticed. Media wrote about it, but he never craved the attention. All he cared about was coming home at the end of each day to mismatched socks, crayon drawings, and Naomi's quiet smile. Elias grew tall and thoughtful. Zara danced everywhere she went. Mika developed an obsession with dogs and convinced them to adopt a rescue mutt named Benny. Jordan sometimes found himself overwhelmed by the noise, the chaos, the endless demands of fatherhood. But never, not once, did he regret the life he had chosen. One spring afternoon, years after that night in the rain, they returned to the same intersection. It was a soft, drizzly day. The rain barely fell, more a mist than a storm. Jordan parked the car at the curb and turned off the engine. The children were older now, giggling in the back seat, unaware of what this place meant. But Jordan and Naomi knew. They stepped out and stood there in silence. "This is where I found you," he said. "No," Naomi replied, leaning into his side. "This is where we found each other." They spread a blanket on the damp sidewalk, poured tea from a thermos, and shared cookies from a tin. The kids laughed. Zara pretended the rain was fairy dust. Elias sketched clouds in his notebook. Mika shared his cookie with Benny. A passerby slowed, puzzled by the sight, a family sitting under light rain, laughing as if they didn't notice the weather. And then he smiled, because somehow he understood. There are stories that begin with tragedy, pain, and fear. But sometimes when someone chooses to stop instead of driving past, when someone sees, really sees, a new story begins. Not with magic, but with choice, with kindness, with love. And it becomes everything. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe for more emotional journeys. Let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from?